I will be doing my refutation speech on Leila Hatcher's topic of genetically modified organisms. Her claim was that genetically modified organisms provide a number of benefits. Those benefits include helping countries, improving crops, and are beneficial to the environment. Her secondary claims were that GMOs help countries that are underdeveloped. GMOs are a logical step to crop improvement, and that GMOs are environmental benefits. My response to her first secondary claim that GMOs help underdeveloped countries, without proof of underdeveloped countries actually being helped by GMOs, her evidence is not valid. In her example, she has no evidence of underdeveloped countries already being helped with GMO foods. A group of scientists from the San Diego Center for Molecular Agriculture states GM crops, or genetically modified crops, cannot eliminate poverty and hunger because these problems are rooted in the socio-political realm. People need jobs to purchase food, and with economic demand, food production usually picks up. Although the world does indeed produce enough food to eliminate hunger, we have not yet devised an economic system that permits the distribution of that food in an equitable way. So GMO foods would not directly improve underdeveloped countries. My response to her secondary claim that GMOs are a logical step to crop improvement is that she indicates that GMOs increase yield, leading to crops for more food production. But according to many researchers, it has been shown that none of the genetically engineered seeds significantly increase the yield of crops. Dr. Charles Benbrook, the former director of the Board of Agriculture at the National Academy of Sciences, states, indeed, in more than 8,200 field trials, the genetically altered Roundup seeds produced fewer bushels of soybean than similar natural varieties. Statistics from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations states that between 1986 and 2010, Western Europe's yield averaged 82,899 hectograms per hectare, just slightly above the United States yields of 82,841 hectograms per hectare. So based off of these statistics, they found that yield benefits or limitations over time are due to breeding and not genetic modification. Because Western Europe has benefited from the same or marginally greater yield increases without genetic modification. Having said that, this disproves her claim that GMOs will increase yield because it is not proven that it will be so in every instance. My response to her third secondary claim that GMOs are environmental benefits, her warrant is inaccurate because she did not inform you all that pesticides are still being used to kill insects in GMO foods. Researchers have found that the plants have caused super weeds and toxin-resistant insects to emerge. This means farmers have to use more pesticides on their crops, while also increasing the toxicity of the environment. A team of researchers at Washington State University found that the weight of chemicals used on U.S. farms has increased by 183 million kilos since GM crops were introduced. Of that total, herbicide use increased over the 16-year period by 239 kilos. Those GM crops that have been modified in the laboratory become immune to certain weed killers, causing issues with the amount of herbicide use. Student leader Professor Charles Benbrook of the University Center for Sustaining Agriculture and Natural Resources said, resistant weeds have become a major problem for many farmers relying on GM crops, and are now driving up the volume of herbicide needed each year by about 25%. This denies the claim that she made that GMOs decrease the need for pesticide. Because it has been proven that they instead increase the need for pesticides. In conclusion, her claim of that genetically modified organisms provide a number of benefits is not valid because she did not give sufficient information on her grounds. Thank you.
All right, it was a little confusing at the beginning because you kind of previewed the structure twice, and I wasn't sure why that was going on. But when you got to the body of the speech, you signposted your points pretty clearly. The lack of proof from the advocate is only partially explained. You don't tell us what the problem with their evidence was or how they reached their inference incorrectly. Generally, you're dealing with a counterclaim on the first point where there's this argument that simply says poverty is not going to be eliminated by the amount of food that's available because it's really economic and political issues that create these difficulties. That's a very generic response on the issue. I don't know that it addresses the information that the advocate cited on that particular point, so that felt to me like the weakest of your responses. But I thought your other responses were much more elaborate. They're primarily counterclaims because you're not really analyzing the evidence and reasoning for the most part. There's one or two mild exceptions on that of the advocate's argument. You are presenting instead counterclaims that suggest a different conclusion. So, for example, the amount of increase in yields is challenged very effectively. You don't tell us what was problematic about their evidence, but you do present a pretty good piece of evidence on your own that suggests that there hasn't been a substantial difference. And then we get the comparisons between Western Europe and the United States, where they don't apparently use genetically modified products, and there hasn't been a substantial difference in the yields. I thought that that's a pretty straightforward piece of evidence that supports your position. Again, I don't remember what the advocate's evidence on this point was, so if you're going to use evidence as a counterclaim, sometimes the best way to do that is to contrast it to the argument that the advocate's presenting, and I think you could do that a little bit more effectively. Now, on the third point, there was a reasoning challenge that you talked about. You suggest that there's an important premise here that's been ignored, and that is that pesticides are still being used, and in fact, there's a need for them to continue to be used, and it's increasing. The stuff about weed resistance and super insects and that sort of thing is mostly asserted on your part. I thought that was a little problematic, but the information about the increased use in herbicides, that was documented, and then there's kind of this general argument at the end, which is not particular. I don't know it addresses the issues that the advocate talked about, but it's a good general way to finish up. Presentation, way too much reading. You never engage in the audience. Come on, be a little assertive about this. You don't have to point and wave your fingers and scream. You don't have to go all Donald Trump on everybody, but I do think that you need to have a little bit more energy. All right, thank you.